The shield I have on my arm is the most famous one from the Middle Ages. The one that comes to mind when we think of knights. But do you really know it? Let's take a look at it. I'm going to start by explaining the name, but for that I need to make a clarification. Many of the terms we use today to refer to ancient weapons or shields were not used at the time. They're somewhat anachronistic. What do I mean by this? Well, for example, shields back then were simply known as shields, at least most of them. For example, when we talk about the Roman scutum like this one I have here, we know we're referring to this one. But really, if we say the shield scutum, are we saying something like the shield? The same thing happens with the Roman gladius, saying the sword gladius is like saying the sword. With Viking shields, what happened was that they simply called them shields. And the same thing happened with the tear-shaped or Norman shield. They referred to it as a shield. Ultimately, a warrior would simply call their shield a shield without any specific name, since they typically only had one type. For instance, I'll grab my shield, hand me the shield, or similar phrases. The term used in English to refer to this shield is heater shield, and the literal translation would be something like the heating shield, the stove shield. Obviously, I'm not going to call it stove shield, iron shield, or heating shield. I've looked for the term in Spanish, but I haven't found it, and it's been impossible for me to find it. If anyone knows it and is certain that it's the correct one, please leave it for me in the comments so I can use it from now on. For now, I'm going to call it the triangular shield, because it looks like a triangle. Although probably when I make other videos and refer to it, I'll probably call it the Aragonese shield. Why? It's not because it was exclusive to the Crown of Aragon, but because the flag I painted on it is that of the Crown of Aragon. Therefore, when I talk about it, it'll be easier to identify it on the wall. If I call it the Aragon coat of arms, that's it. We could say this one resembles the triangular coat of arms. Base, a flat upper part, from which two curves descend that meet at a point. But as I said, it's the base. It can have variations. Variations like what? Well, for example, this one up here. As you can see, the top part isn't flat, but it has two curves ending in a point. They can be more or less pronounced in this case. This one is metal. I made this one, but not that one. The triangular shield, these two. It's the successor of one of the other shields. Could you tell me which one? Correct. Of this one, the Norman shield or the teardrop shield. Think that if you take this one and start shortening its length and start flattening the top part, what you'll get is this one. And you might ask yourselves, why did they go from this shield to that one? Okay, I want to make a specific video about the evolution of the shape of shields and why. I'll now provide you with two key points or main ideas. The first is that this shield is lighter. This will allow the warrior to fight for a longer time and move more easily across the battlefield. And the second is that with the improvement of armor, the warrior no longer needs to have his whole body protected. For example, with the inclusion of greaves. The lower part of the shield is no longer so necessary, because there could be certain attacks coming from below, as you can also see here. Also, you can tell that making the shield is truly a craft. You can see that it has a curve. The curve, well, in the end it's like on the scutum or the teardrop shield, and we'll talk about it later. It can be more or less pronounced in the end. The curve is what gives you an advantage of safety, of protection to the warrior who is carrying it. Because let's say it kind of hugs his body, it surrounds him more. Something that didn't happen, for example, with the Viking shields or round shields, which were flat. Most of them. The shield was made of wood and could be reinforced with hardened leather or metal, for example, on the edges, so that an attack with a sword from above hits the metal or the leather before the shield, so that our protection is greater. Could the entire shield be covered with metal, for example? Nothing stopped you except for the money. Now it's true that it will protect you more against attacks and arrows, but it's going to be much heavier. Therefore, when fighting, you'll get tired sooner, and at the same time, since it's heavier, you'll be able to move it with less agility. In the end, as always, like when I talked about this shield and the issue of size, you have to find the balance between comfort and protection. By the way, have you noticed that it doesn't have a humbo? This one has it and this one doesn't. Why? Do you remember the reason I gave you? The humbo? It was used when the shield had a handle because at that time you had to pierce the shield to be able to hold it, and therefore, you needed something to protect your hand. In this case, since I'm wearing armor, which I'll talk about in a moment, I don't need any humbo, so that's weight we save. And what about the armor? That is, it also varied depending on the needs and preferences of each warrior. For example, in my case, I've placed the armor diagonally. That is, in an ascending way for me. Why? Well, because it's been more comfortable for me. I could have also placed them horizontally, so that the shield would be held like this. And I could have also placed them vertically, so that the shield would be held like this. There are many types. There were also shields that could have all the alternatives or some of them at the same time. At the same time. That is, you could have straps here and another here to hold it horizontally, and the same shield could also have a strap here and another here, so that the warrior could switch from one to the other as he wished. Also, I've seen another model that doesn't really convince me, but just to mention it, where the diagonal is the same as this one, but going downward. That is, the arm goes in through here at the top and is held here. The theory is that by holding it like this, let's see how I do it. By holding it downward, you could rest the shield on your leg. I find it a bit, maybe uncomfortable, maybe also because I haven't practiced it, but for my personal preference, I chose to hold it diagonally like this, and for me, it's more comfortable. I should also mention that the shields, most of them had a longer strap, a strap that went over the neck and was fastened underneath. What for? So you can let go of the shield when you're not fighting? In my case, I don't wear it because I decided not to put it on, but it was common for them to wear it, just like the teardrop shields. Another use for this long strap was to be able to, let's say, attach the shield to our forearm. We could use a long strap. So let's say all the weight of the shield. It rests on our shoulder, our neck, and we handle the shield like this so that we could move it. I find this way, like this, quite uncomfortable. Honestly, it could be used, but again, in the end, I think it's up to the warrior's preference and how you get used to using it that way. I just talked about the most common ways that infantry will hold the shield. All right, but there was also another way. Let's see if it fits in my hand. Well, no, it doesn't fit on my shield. But anyway, imagine that the strap stays here. Okay, when it's finished. I remember that this shield, I say, and I didn't have all the options in mind either. Imagine that the strap stays on my wrist and I have my hand free like this. For what? Well, on one hand, I could grab a knife. I could be fighting with a knife in my hand. And if he loses the sword, for whatever reason, he could grab the knife and have a backup secondary weapon. But it's also very important for the cavalry. I'll grab it again with both hands now so I don't lose it. And why was it important for the cavalry? Well, think about it. When the knight is mounted on horseback, he carries a heavy lance in his right hand, which he can't let go of, and the shield in his left. It's true that he can guide the horse and steer it with his legs, but he also needs to hold the reins. So if you're holding the shield like this, you'll have to hold the reins in the same hand you're using as a weapon, which can be quite uncomfortable. Therefore, if the rider managed to free his left hand and position the shield so that his hand was free, like this, remember that the strap goes around my wrist, he could hold the reins with complete freedom. One of the advantages of these weapons is that, since the shield is so close to our body, we need less strength to lift it and, therefore, we get tired less quickly. However, this is also a disadvantage at the same time. Why? Because by having it close to the body, look, see the range of motion I have. I can protect my body, but I don't have that much maneuverability, that much mobility. In other words, with this shield, if you remember with the Viking or round shield, since it has a handle, I could move it wherever I wanted. I had much more freedom. And one of the main advantages was that I could cover my legs. With this one, as I just said, it only covers my arm. I would have to bend down. Doesn't matter. Well, as I mentioned at the beginning, the triangular shield evolved from the Norman one in part because one of the reasons was that armor evolved. Therefore, if we have better greaves, we can afford not to cover our legs with the shield. Now, it's not a matter of staying still either. In the end, we're going to replace that greater protection, that greater coverage with better armor and at the same time, footwork. Being able to dodge the enemy's attack, step back if we're attacked, and so on. Because, as we'll see now, this shield was no longer designed to fight in a closed formation as such. This shield, as I said, was not used in formations, but that's putting it in context. It was used on a front line. You here, your comrade here, another one here, another behind. But it's not a shield designed to make and form formations like shield walls. For example, this shield could be interlocked with those of your comrades. And did you have a sturdy shield wall? This shield couldn't form a proper shield wall like the one typically envisioned. And in terms of handling comfort, the truth is that it's quite comfortable and very manageable. You can launch thrusting attacks, slashing attacks, attacks of any kind. You can even hit with your shield. On the contrary, I'm using this sword from the Viking Great Migrations because I don't have a sword in my gear. So if any generous weapon wants to give me one or support the channel, by subscribing to the members section or donating through PayPal so I can buy one, I appreciate it. And as I mentioned, it's quite comfortable. Above all, fine-tune the balance. Notice the imbalance you might have felt with the round shield? I was going back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago. You don't move so far away from the shield. And in the end, we could say it becomes part of your forearm. I'm going to repeat the slashing and stabbing attacks I did before because I want to ask you a question. Earlier I did a stabbing attack. A slashing attack from the right, a slashing attack from the left. From above. I'm going to launch a closer attack, but I want to ask us a question. Of all these attacks I've launched, there's one. That's wrong. That's horrible. That appears in games, movies, but it's horrible. Let me know in the comments which one you think it is. I'm thinking that in the end, this video series could go a long way. I'm planning to talk about mistakes that are made in movies and games. When people fought with medieval weapons, I'd also like to show you how they actually fought with medieval weapons. But in the end, it's just a project I have. I can't guarantee when it will come out or how it will come out. It's something I'll be working on little by little, and I'll be posting the videos for you. And that's all. That's it for today's video. Subscribe, like, and join the channel's membership. Anyway, the usual stuff. Greetings and stay strong.